Central Regional Library Safe Inside Your Walls programming, supported by Safe at Home Manitoba.
Hi, I'm Linda, and I'm a librarian. Today I'm going to be reading to you from the book The Names of Our Tears by PL Gaus. Monday, April 4th, 7:45 a.m. It was Coblin's chocolate that had Mervyn Byler awake so early that morning. Fine Coblin's chocolate and the artful Widow Stutzman who made it. This would be his 7th trip this spring up to the heights at Walnut Creek, and he knew the best gossips in the valley would be making sport of him again today. What could draw old Mervyn out so early, they'd be asking each other so delicately. Was it really the Coblenz chocolate? Was he just a retired old farmer out for a drive? Maybe he just liked to show off his high-stepping racehorse. Or could it be the Widow Stutzman? Oh, how they'd sure be buzzing today, Mervyn thought. Why, yes, he smiled. It looks as if he's washed his best Sunday rig again. Mervyn stepped out into the cold air in a new Amish blue denim suit and stood on the front porch of his white clapboard daddy house, set back 20 paces from the wide gravel drive that curled around the back of the big house. A cool breeze tugged at his white chin whiskers, and a gust caught under the wide brim of his black felt hat, nearly lifting it from his head. He settled the warm hat back into place and stood to enjoy the familiar sounds of the farm, all the family, parents and kids alike, at work since well before dawn. In the wood shop behind the barn, that was his oldest son Daniel he heard running lumber through the tabletop saw. Lowing as they nipped at the hay in the feeders, the milking cows were back on the hillside pastures beyond. The youngest kids were bringing baskets of eggs out of the hen house. And beside the big house, an older grandson was starting a gasoline generator, charging the marine batteries for several electric appliances the family kept. A phone in a little shed out by the road, a secret radio for severe weather. Half a dozen light bulbs where safety called for something other than kerosene lanterns, and an electric butter churn that Mervyn had brought home on a whim from Lehman's Hardware in Kidron. Standing on his front porch, Mervyn listened with satisfaction to the familiar sounds of morning chores, the rhythms of family life on the farm. In his day, when the farm had been theirs, he and his Leona had been accustomed to early rising, too. They had owned the farm for 40 years, and then they had lived together for 7 more happy years in their little daddy house, watching Daniel and Becky raise their own, in the same home where Mervyn and Leona Byler had raised their 12. It's fitting, Mervyn thought. The old move aside for the young, who in turn honor their parents with the gift of a new home. Byler sighed and thought about Leona, gone for nearly 3 years. So fine a woman, so many good years. Now their little daddy house was a lonely place for him, and Mervyn had fallen into slack habits. Most would say it was shameful, the way he ignored the chores. He slept in, and he got up when it suited him. Mervyn Byler figured he had earned his rest. Truth be told, Leona might say it was a bit much. When they had retired, she had insisted that they rise with the others and tend to their share of the chores too. But now Mervyn gladly let his sons plant and harvest the crops, tend to the livestock, handle all the duties on the farm. Mervyn Byler was retired, and he had fun and suitable places to be, never mind what the gossips might say about the Widow Stutzman. He felt young again, and he knew with the wisdom of age that that feeling was not to be squandered. With great satisfaction over his prospects for the morning, Byler noted that the stiff breeze was snatching a thin gray line of smoke from the chimney of Becky's kitchen stove at the back of the big house. The fire is still going, he thought. As late as it was, there would still be hot coffee in the pot. Maybe he could take some of Becky's biscuits, too, wrap them in a towel for the trip. Byler considered it briefly. But his best mare was already hitched up and waiting on the drive, shuddering from the energy bottled up in her limbs. Just like Mervyn, she was eager to begin. Mervyn clipped down the wooden steps on his new leather soles and climbed into his Sunday buggy, laughing at himself. thinking that he could already hear the chatter, knowing what the valley gossips would say if they ever got a look inside his cupboards, stuffed full to bursting with Cobblent's chocolates of every kind. They would be asking themselves why an old man needed to be driving back to Walnut Creek again when his cupboards were already shamefully overstocked with more sweets than any sensible man could eat. For the fun of it, he ought to drop a hint somewhere along the line. Put it out there among the talkers that he didn't really like chocolate that much. Truth be told, he favored salty chips more than sweets. Wonderful, crunchy, salty chips of every kind. Just tell one of them, he thought, and soon they'd all be a chatter. He'd make a few trips into Walmart for a dozen bags of Ruffles, and that news would be singing like electric in the wires. Why, don't you know, Mervyn doesn't really like sweets at all. Then he could enjoy the sparks. He couldn't remember a time when he had felt so young. But don't kid yourself, Mervyn smiled. Today I'll just tap on the glass, see if she'll come round to the tourists' gallery for a chat. Maybe he could visit on Sunday with the North Walnut Creek Laymans and stay after services for the social. Then his valley would sure be all abuzz. Was it the Koblenz chocolates or the widow Stutzman? A Sunday visit in old Ben Lehman's district would settle it for sure. They'd all be talking for over a month. Mervyn climbed up, took the reins, and walked his buggy out to the lane in front of the big house. He turned right to follow Township Lane 166 toward the north, thinking that maybe she'd give him a look today, something to help him make up his mind. But hadn't she done that already the last time he visited? Mervyn wasn't sure. Was it a look, or was it a smile? Maybe it was just a glance. Yes, at the time he had thought it was just a glance. Now it seemed to him that it might have been more than that. Was it really encouragement for a suitor, or was she mocking an old fool? Never mind, he told himself. I'll tap on the glass today. Then she'll give me one look or the other look, and I'll know if I should bother with any more chocolates from the Cobblentz store. Not that there's room in my cupboards. He set a good pace for his horse and took the reins in his left hand. With his right, he fished his money roll out of the side pocket of his denim trousers. It was a suitable sum, he thought. $487, most of it in 10s and 20s. He wouldn't need nearly that much. Still, a man ought to be prepared. Maybe after he stopped in Walnut Creek, he'd run up Route 39 to the Walmart in Millersburg. That'd put him home after dark. Smiling broadly, he thought how that news would spread itself among the folk. Up to Walnut Creek for the widow Stutzman and way over to Millersburg just for chips? There'd be no end of talk. At the intersection with Township 165, Byler turned left and took the gravel lane where it cut a gap in the remote southeastern corner of Holmes County. Exhausted from a brutal winter, most fields lay bare on the rolling hills, but some had been plowed already, their tidy rows of newly turned earth looking eagerly dark and moist for planting. On the slope to his left he saw the new shoots of winter wheat promising the harvest in July. Ahead on his right stood the stubble of feed corn cut last autumn, the arching rows of blunted shafts curving gracefully over the crest. Take the back roads today, Byler thought. No sense getting out on SR 39, where the traffic is so crazy. When had the tourists discovered Walnut Creek? 20 years ago, there hadn't been anything at all in the little town. Now it was overbuilt for commerce, and the traffic was incessant, with out-of-state plates and buses from all the big cities. Mervyn frowned. He gave the reins a determined slap. Back roads will take longer, he told himself, but the trip will be safer, and you'll get there in one piece, you old fool, so stick to the backmost roads. The narrow wheels of his buggy cut fine, wavy lines into the gravel and mud of the lane, and he gave the reins another slap to encourage his horse. The whisper music of his buggy wheels running in the wet gravel and the clipping rhythm of his horse's hooves spoke peacefulness to him. Koblenz chocolate and the widow Stutzman. Who could ask for a better morning? Following the creek that was fed by the spring on the Yoder farm, he traveled generally north and west, and made the sharp right turn where the road curved to the north. The glade that lay ahead to his left was lined by sycamores whose old roots sank deep into the rocky cut of the creek. A stand of barren maples beside the road sheltered the little glade from view at first, but soon he reached the clearing beside the road, where the Yoders maintained a service road for an oil well. Behind the low knoll, Byler could see the top of the wellhead, where the Yoders took off their natural gas feed, and beside that stood a green tank for the oil that was being pumped slowly out of the ground. As he skirted the glade, however, Byler saw a horse and buggy standing at the back of the clearing, beside the bend in the service road. The horse was tethered to a sapling, and it was bucking wildly in its harness, its head popping up and down and back and forth as it whipped the leather reins that were tied to the tree. Byler stopped, climbed down from his rig, and circled around through tangled brush to reach the front of the horse, not wanting to agitate it any further by coming up on its rear. As he approached, he called out to the horse, "Hey there! Hey, big fella! Whoa!" But as he pushed through the brambles, his feet crunching twigs and fallen branches, the horse bucked and danced all the more, its hooves striking strangely to the left and the right, as if it were trying to step a rattlesnake, as if it couldn't bear to let its footfalls touch the ground. And that's when Byler first saw the girl lying underneath the rear hooves of the horse. An Amish girl in a forest green dress, wearing the black denim jacket of a man. Sprawled under the hooves of the frantic horse, trampled face down in the mud beside the spring. Clothes caked with bloodied mud, arms and legs sprawled to the sides like broken twigs. The hair at the back of her head matted with blood from a gaping hole in her skull. The frightened horse pounding out its terror on her back. Byler stepped up to the sapling and drew his pocket knife. He cut once at the reins wrapped around the trunk, but failed to sever the hold. He cut again with more force, and the leather gave way, but still held. Then he slashed with his blade a third time, and the reins snapped free, sending the horse bolting off to the side, dragging the wheels of the buggy sideways over the body of the girl, flipping her onto her back. The horse and buggy disappeared around the curve of the lane. Staring down at the trampled body of the girl, Byler could hear the plaintive cries of the horse as it struggled to free itself from the harness. He knelt to brush the mud from her face and felt a round wound in her forehead. Each time the buggy bounced out of a chuck hole, it seemed to Byler that it actually flew. He whipped the horse again and tried to keep his seat as he raced back home to the phone booth beside the road. 30 yards out, he started slowing the horse, but he overshot the phone. Not bothering to steady or tether the horse, Byler hopped down beside the picket fence in front of Daniel's house, let the horse pace forward to stop on its own, dashed into the phone booth, pulled the receiver to his ear, and tried to turn the dial. His fingers were shaking so badly, it took him 3 tries to swing the dial around to get 911. Groaning as he waited for an answer, Mervyn's feet marched out a manic step in place inside the tight confines of the little shed. When the operator answered, he shouted, "Dead girl!" as loud as he could, and repeated it, saying, "I found a dead girl!" He dropped the receiver, pushed back through the door, and ran for the house, shouting, "Daniel! Becky! Get help!" Then he remembered the phone and ran back to the booth. When he picked up the receiver, the operator started asking him questions, and he answered them as best he could. "Beside the Yoder's Spring. Yes, it's Holmes County, at the big bend of Township 165 and 166. She's dead, I tell you. Get the sheriff! Because I felt a hole in her forehead when I tried to brush the mud out of her eyes." Then, with his thoughts muddled by adrenaline, Mervyn answered several more questions, while Daniel and Becky stood outside the phone booth, with anxious questions in their eyes. Mervyn finished the call, laid the handset back on its cradle, and stood alone inside, trying to understand how he could manage to do what the man on the phone had asked him to do, to go back, to wait there, and to talk with the deputies when they arrived. He turned in place, opened the door, and stepped outside to tell Daniel and Becky what he had seen. But several of the children had gathered with their parents, so he drew Daniel aside to whisper. As he did so, Mervyn Byler couldn't remember a time when he had felt so old. That's Chapter 1 of The Names of Our Tears by PL Gaus. And if you would like to know what happens next, you'll have to read the book.
Thanks for joining us. for the Safe at Home Manitoba program. Stay safe inside your wall.